By now it's clear that the type of blocking we're working with in this course can't be improvised on the set, but has to be planned. To do that, we need a system for blocking on paper. Here we'll propose a system that's extremely easy to draw, either freehand or with a template that can draw circles and triangles, which is available at most office stores. We're usually starting with the layout of the set, which we either get from the production designer or from a sketch of the location. We'll illustrate characters as circles. Here we'll create 2 characters and give them each a color. Since colors are harder to erase, it makes sense to not add the colors before we're sure of the characters' positions. To illustrate which way they're facing, we'll draw a line inside the circle. In this course, we have men and women of the same colors, so to avoid confusion, we'll illustrate the women with an extra line. We'll illustrate cameras as 2 sides of a triangle, showing the rough angle the camera is shooting. If this isn't over the shoulder, we'll add a matching reverse here. Next, we'll have the blue woman turn away from the red man. To show that, we'll simply draw another face inside the circle and an arrow to show the turn. To show character movement, we'll simply draw another circle in the new location and an arrow to show the movement. The arrow can be any color. Here we're drawing it the same color as the character for clarity. Drawing a separate character for each stop is the same as we did on Volume 2, and it makes managing the line phenomenally easier. To show tracking shots, we'll draw another camera over here and connect them with a line. We'll draw an arrow to show the direction of the track. This camera now starts in and over the shoulder and pulls ahead of her as she walks. We'll additionally add small dots to show each of the stops on the track. This is useful because if we have complicated panning while tracking, we might want to draw that as extra cameras on the track that function as guides instead of stops. Next, we'll have the man walk over here, so we'll again draw another circle and a line to show the walk. To cover that, we'll have the tracking camera pivot on the woman. The ending keyframe will be here, so we'll draw another camera on the track and add a dot for the stop. To show the move, we'll first of all draw a small arrow for the reuse of the track. Second, we'll write PIV for pivot. For very simple tracks, an arrow or 2 is enough to remember the order we need to track between the keyframes in, but for very complicated tracks, it usually works better to write numbers by each stop. If we then return to the diagram in a month or 2, we can quickly get a picture of what we meant. Here's then what this test scene looks like. We start by cutting the dialogue between the characters. The key to blocking like this is that we're not trying to create a mathematically correct diagram or even a rigid plan that we have to follow to the letter. The plan just needs to be close enough, and we can make the final tweaks on the set or discover things we hadn't thought of. Here we reframe as the woman turns away from the man. As she walks, we pull ahead of her, trying to keep the man in the frame. Arriving by a small table. As the man walks to a second mark, we reuse the track for the pivot. Next, we'll look at illustrating panning, tilting, and booming. In this scene, the blue man walks over to the red man. To show a pan, we'll just draw the ending keyframe and an arrow into it, which is usually obvious enough to imply that there's a previous keyframe with the camera facing more to the left. For more specific pans, we can also draw each keyframe, but we naturally want to avoid drawing too many cameras on top of each other. Next, the red man walks past the red woman who's sitting in a chair. We want to move with him and hand off to the woman, ending in this keyframe, so we'll lay a track between the 2 extremes. Add an arrow to show the movement, and 2 dots to show the stops. But because she's sitting in a chair, we'll want to be low at the end. To illustrate the boom action, we'll write the elevation of the camera at each stop. So behind the first location, we write up, and behind the second, we'll write DN for down. We'll show tilting up and down as an arrow in front of the camera. To tilt down, we'll show an arrow going into the camera. A good analogy is to see it as tilting towards the feet. To tilt up, we'll show an arrow going out and up. To tilt both up and down, we'll draw an arrow going both ways. To use this, let's have the blue man walk over to the woman. As he arrives, we want to tilt up, so we'll draw an arrow away from the camera. At the end, the blue man walks away, and we tilt down again, so we'll add another arrowhead pointing towards the camera. Let's first look at the camera movement. We start by panning into the first dialogue. Again, we'll just let the written blocking be close enough and make the final adjustments on the set. Here as the man walks, the diagram says to crane down during the track, but in reality we'll stay level with him for the first half, and then begin craning down halfway through the move. As the blue man steps in, we tilt up. As he leaves, we tilt down and end the scene on the woman. Since the track and dolly are the hardest to move around, we'll set up the shot so it's about right and then tweak the character's marks and even rearrange the set to perfect the framing. As we track with the red man and hand off to the woman, we might have found on our first run-through that the framing wasn't completely right. At this point, it's much easier to move her than it is to move the track. The blue man steps in and we tilt up. He leaves and we tilt down to end on the woman. The last thing we'll look at is how to illustrate many things happening in the same spot, starting with characters changing elevation. In this scene, the red character is sitting behind a table and the blue character is standing. So we'll put in two reverses. This one is low because the red character is sitting, and this one is high because the blue character is standing. But we don't need to write that because we can just as well make that decision on the set. If the red character stands up, we'll simply make a note that he stands up, which implies that he's sitting down before that. If the reverse on him tilts up with him, we would just draw an arrow out and up. But if we're booming up, we have two elevations in the same spot. So by writing both elevations as down up, we'll know to start down and then boom up. Another thing that can be hard to write down is when characters reuse each other's stops, which is a very effective way to save cameras because we don't need any new coverage. Here the blue man walks over to the gray man and we'll set up two reverses. But when he walks out, the red man walks over where he stood so we can use the same cameras. No matter which way we draw this, if we return to it in a month, we'll need a moment to understand what we meant. So let's simply draw a dot in the middle of the character to remember that it's a dual-use stop and leave it in the color of the first character standing there. We also need a way to write down doing several versions of a take. In a typical situation, we've set up an over-the-shoulder to do a slow push during the dialogue. If we want to cut wide again after the push, we'll need a full lock take from the wide position. So we'll write L for locked by that keyframe. If we wanted a lock close shot as well, we write L by the close keyframe. We then have 3 takes, 2 locked and 1 that tracks. Sometimes a lock take needs to have very different behavior than the tracking version. Before the main dialogue, let's say that the red character walks in and we want to boom up from his feet while panning into the over-the-shoulder. We'd write this as both down up and an arrow for the pan. But if this is only meant for the locked version, it can get confusing and we're better off drawing it as a separate camera nearby the original keyframe. Even though we'll physically shoot it with the same camera on the same track, this way makes it easier for us to remember what we meant when we drew it.